A few days ago, Saffron Olive posted a tweet ruminating on the question of whether Armageddon was the answer to green ramp strategies, stating that green ramp strategies are overpowered and utility lands are also overpowered and they need to be punished. I agree with that to a certain extent. However, I do not agree that Armageddon is the answer. Blowing up the entire world, including your own lands, is not going to solve the problem of green in the way that you think it will. Dana Roach had a great response to this. I know I'm kind of picking on these guys. These are great follows, by the way. Everyone follow them on Twitter, on YouTube, wherever. But Dana Roach says that MLD doesn't punish green decks. It just gives them permission to use it and use it 10 times better than non-green decks ever will. And he gives an example in baseball. The A's weren't the only team who could play Moneyball. The big market teams could use those principles too and use them way better. So you'll have a deck. Let's pretend that Armageddon becomes mainstream. Everyone's playing Armageddon. Here's Armageddon. It's super salty. It's on the number 5 most saltiest card on EDH Rex. Okay, fine. We're all going to play it. So, we play our Armageddons. Here's some more examples of Armageddon. And the green deck just responds and plays Crucible of Worlds, Raminep Excavator, Conduit of Worlds. They play other cards such as Blossoming Tortoise. They have this. It comes into play untapped. They have Aftermath Analyst, I guess. I mean, this is a new one. This returns all lands from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. I mean, you can bring that back. You can play Undergrowth Recon. This is a new card. Beginning of your upkeep, return target land from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. So the green deck just puts this into play, puts a Crucible into play, casts an Armageddon, game over. I mean, no one else is going to be able to rebuild. Or people are going to be forced into playing green to play Undergrowth Recon and other effects of this nature. Splendid Reclamation, obviously Life from the Loam, World Shaper. These are the big daddy ones. They return all your lands. This is 3 lands and recurable. Life from the Loam, World Shaper, same deal, returns when it dies. So green decks would just resort to this, and you would not have a fair fight. It might even be more unfair because not only would they be ahead on mana, you would have nothing. You would have no mana. If you're a mono white, mono red deck, any deck without green, essentially, you wouldn't just be behind. You'd be done. It'd be over, totally over. They could play decks like Muldrotha, Get Rog Monster, etc. And so the format, I feel, if Armageddon, if the boogeyman here comes into play and becomes mainstream, the format, I feel, would contract and reduce in the number of viable strategies. You wouldn't have Battlecruiser cards. You wouldn't have Battlecruiser Commander anymore. You wouldn't have Ur-Dragon probably, unless they're playing Armageddon. You wouldn't have, let's see, I'm trying to find a good example here. Dinosaurs. Everybody loves dinosaurs. You probably wouldn't have, although they could play Armageddon plus land recursion, but then it wouldn't be a dinosaur deck. It just reduces all your strategies. There's a lot of toxic commanders up here, I'm noticing. But Henzi. Okay, Henzi's a fun one. That is green. Let's see. Teysa Karlov. Here we go. Aristocrats. They could play Armageddon, but they couldn't recover. So there's tons of examples of decks that you really wouldn't be able to play very well in a world of Armageddon. And so the issue here is that these effects that just destroy everything, that are just, Ruination, I feel, is actually fine. This card, I'm trying to think. This is non-basic lands. People get greedy mana bases. That card is not the end of the world. I think it's fine. This card is egregious. Back to basics. Back to basics is not fun. It's a little bit like Blood Moon, although it is okay. It's kind of like Ruination, but it's a permanent effect. It's not a one-time effect, which is why it's a problem. People mention exiling lands as a solution. If Wizards printed more land exile, that could work. However, they'd have to put it in the form of like a Confounded Conundrum, enchantment, or something of that nature. Urza Silex might be a solution, but it only destroys and not exiles, and so the green decks could just rebuild their lands again. So I think exiling is an answer, potentially. Now, there's also the Punisher effects, Polluted Bonds, you have War's Toll, you have Sire Stagnation, and you have Tunnel Ignis. People are giving examples here. You have Zozu the Punisher, damage them when they play lands. Price of Progress. This is probably the best Punisher effect for lands, for the extra lands. Although a lot of the land heavy decks will play a lot of basics, so price might be not quite as good there, but still, the ones that even out the lands, Land Equilibrium, this is reserve list, but something of this nature, which also exiles instead of sacrifices, might be an answer. Then you have the white cards here, which I pulled up. Deep Gnome Terramancer. This is a good example. Whenever one or more lands enter the battlefield under an opponent's control without being played, you may search for a plains, put on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So this card answers. However, it's very efficient, but it's also like a little bit narrow because you're only playing it against. It's only really playable against green decks. So you would need something of this nature that's playable against a variety of decks. I mean, Knight of the White Orchid is a good example. This is the classic, right? If they have more lands than you, comes into play, you get a land. That I think is fine because it works in the turn order. So if you're a white deck and you're going third in turn order, for example, you're going to trigger this as you play it. Deep Gnome Terramancer might not trigger. However, the risk with these white cards in facing the land decks is that in multiples, they get less good, and so it's kind of a Band-Aid solution to Armageddon here. And so the answer to Armageddon, I feel, is tricky. I have an answer, but you might not like it. My answer is just to ban Armageddon and all Armageddon-like effects. So ban Armageddon, ban Obliterate, Juckle Hops, Ravages of War, Sunder, maybe not. I don't know. Decree of Annihilation, Devastation, Apocalypse, and so on and so forth. If you ban those cards, the green decks, they're already not facing them. People don't play Apocalypse in their commander decks. You're not seeing an Apocalypse. So what needs to happen is Wizards needs to twofold. So we need to ban the Armageddons, and Wizards needs to print more Deep Gnome Terramancer, Confounded Conundrum style effects, but make them better, make them even better, and make lands, make it a choice to play lands. Make it actually, it's like, oh man, if I play too many lands or ramp too much, I might face this, this artifact that everybody's playing right now that lets them draw cards or something like that. And so if Wizards does that, and we ban the Armageddons, we won't have to have the discussion anymore. Green will be brought back a little bit, and we've noticed that they have not printed a lot of like super strong rampant growth effects lately. Just gonna type that in, rampant growth. So like green is not getting new rampant growths in quantity or quality that you might think, because Wizards knows that the strategy is very powerful. So I think they're slowly getting there, and they have printed the Deep Gnomes, they have printed the Confounded Conundrums. They started a little bit conservative, and I think that's fair because they don't want to break Magic with that. So the Armageddon, it's an interesting topic. I understand why people are frustrated. I understand why Saffron Olive's frustrated, and people on Twitter were just going off on this. Natural Balance is an interesting answer. It's in green, which is a little bit awkward, but the idea that punishing lands requires destroying all lands with Armageddon, to me, is just over the top. It's too far. It's not the right answer to the problem. I feel that if you introduce this, like I mentioned before, you lower the number of viable decks, and new players would come in, they'd get Armageddon, and they'd just be like, oh, this isn't really the game for me. There's a stasis in play. Someone's Thassa's Oracling. I mean, and then it's just like, what are we doing here? Like, oh, I can't play my battle cruisers. I can't play my giant dinos. I can't play my angels. And it lowers the diversity of the format. It makes it too much of like a resource denial type game, which Magic has resource denial, but you don't want to go way, way, way too far with it. And Ravages of War, Armageddon effects, I think, go way too far. I also think you're not going to miss it because you don't see these in play very often. Ravages of War, 3,400 decks. Juckle Hops, 7,300. What percentage is that? 0%. Like, these are played in 0% of decks. Decree of Annihilation, Devastation, 0%. Apocalypse, 0%. It's not even, you're not even going to notice it. Like, nobody plays them because they're not fun. and their corner case. Back to basics, and that's a tricky one. I'm just looking at these here. So Armageddon, I think, needs to go. I think I'm going to take it further. I'm gonna go almost the opposite direction of Saffron Olive here. He thinks that Armageddon's the answer. I think that it should be banned. So, yeah, that's my take on the matter. Armageddon should be banned. Wizards should print more cards that answer lands in a way that is benefiting the player casting it, but not destroying the entire world.